December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. 7:56 a.m. Black smoke coils into the morning sky like a funeral shroud. The tropical breeze carries the stench of burning oil, scorched paint, and cordite. Below it all, on the deck of the USS West Virginia, Ensign Kent Lovell is sprinting toward the portside gun station, shouting hoarsely through the chaos. "Get to your positions. This isn't a drill." He knows it's real. Everyone does. The first torpedoes have already struck USS Oklahoma off the port bow. The next wave is coming for them. From the eastern sky, a formation of Nakajima B-5 and Kate torpedo bombers bears down on Battleship Row. Painted with the red circle of the rising sun, they glide low over the harbor, engines screaming like banshees. Moments later, the West Virginia shudders violently, a deafening thud beneath the waterline, then another, and another. 5, 6, maybe more. The torpedoes hit like sledgehammers. The hull splits. Compartments flood. The ship lurches violently to port. Chief Boatswain Harold Jackson, already soaked from the flooding second deck, bellows into the comms tube. She's taking water fast forward, bulkheads compromised. But it's not just water. Fire has broken out. Aviation fuel from the nearby USS Arizona ignites the surface of the harbor. Burning oil flows across the water like a living creature, snaking its way toward the crippled West Virginia. Smoke fills the air. The sound of men screaming, gunfire, and the drone of dive bombers turns Pearl Harbor into a vision of hell. On the bridge, Captain Mervyn S. Benyon, already wounded by shrapnel, refuses to abandon post. Blood seeps through his khaki uniform. He orders counter-flooding to keep the ship from capsizing like the Oklahoma. Even as flames leap around the conning tower, Benyon barks orders until the very end, struck down by another blast from a Japanese bomb that tears through the Tennessee's superstructure and into the West Virginia's command bridge. Below decks, sailors scramble through knee-deep water. Others are trapped behind sealed hatches, pounding on the steel with dying hands. More than 100 men perish inside the hull, entombed as the ship sinks to the shallow bottom. By 10 a.m., the attack ends. The West Virginia rests upright, listing slightly but sunk in place. Only her superstructure and gun turrets remain above the surface. Flames continue to lick at her decks, and smoke curls from her shattered stacks. The harbor around her is littered with wreckage, half-submerged hulls, overturned lifeboats, floating bodies. A few sailors are pulled from the oil-covered water by rescue launches. Others float silently. The scale of the devastation is unimaginable. Behind the wreckage, the battleship USS Arizona burns uncontrollably. Sailors nearby report hearing faint tapping from within West Virginia's hull for days after the attack, a haunting chorus from the men still trapped inside sealed compartments, surviving in shrinking air pockets, waiting for help that will never come. December 8th, 08:00 hours. Naval Salvage Officer Commander Homer N. Wallen stands on a tugboat circling the shattered remains of Battleship Row. He's been assigned one of the most daunting tasks in USS Navy history: raise the sunken ships, rebuild them, return them to the war. He eyes the West Virginia's blackened frame, her steel warped and twisted by torpedoes and heat. "We'll get her back," he mutters, though he isn't sure if anyone believes it yet. Even he isn't sure how. The battleship's once pristine armor belt is breached in 7 places. Oil still leaks slowly from her ruptured fuel bunkers. Her interior is a tomb filled with debris, body parts, and nearly 2 million gallons of fuel. Some compartments remain flooded, others crushed. The keel is still intact, miraculously, but the full damage won't be known for weeks. Journalists call her a lost cause. Many officers agree. It would be easier to scrap her, build new, but the Roosevelt administration disagrees. America needs a symbol, a comeback story, something to show the world and itself that this war will not be lost, that its fleet, though bloodied, will rise. And so begins one of the greatest salvage and reconstruction operations in naval history. December 10th, 09:30 hours. The first divers enter the water. They descend into pitch blackness, using handheld lamps to navigate through the wreck. Inside the West Virginia, the silence is eerie. Floating debris, jagged beams, and decaying bodies block their way. Air pockets smell of rot and diesel. The bulkheads groan with the pressure. Divers take photos, seal bulkheads, begin pumping operations. On the surface, cranes and barges arrive. Floating dry docks are prepared. The task force grows hundreds of welders, pipe fitters, engineers, carpenters, machinists. Most are from the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, but more are flown in from the mainland. The work is brutal, dangerous, often terrifying. But the men work without rest. Every rivet they replace, every steel plate they weld, is done in honor of the fallen. Behind them, the Pacific War rages. Manila is under siege. Wake Island will fall within days. Japan is struck across half the map. But here, beneath the tropical sun and the smoke-streaked skies of Oahu, the first strokes of American vengeance are being forged not in fire, but in steel, sweat, and silence. December 14th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. The sun has barely risen, but the air already buzzes with the clang of steel, the whine of winches, and the bark of shouted commands. Smoke from acetylene torches spirals skyward as teams of welders line up along the West Virginia's starboard hull. The battleship isn't just a wreck anymore, she's a mission, a symbol, a battleground of a different kind. Commander Homer Wallen, now coordinating the salvage of all sunken vessels at Pearl, walks the length of the yard beside Lieutenant Commander J.A. Martin, the shipyard's lead engineer. Both are gaunt, sleep-deprived, uniforms salt-stained, but their eyes stay locked on the West Virginia's battered silhouette. She's sitting in about 40 feet of water, Martin says grimly. Main deck's still a few feet below the surface. We'll need to patch the torpedo holes before we can raise her at all. Wallen doesn't flinch. Then we start welding. The first step is clearing the interior, and that means facing what was left behind. December 18th, 24th. Interior clearance phase. The inside of the West Virginia is a nightmare. In pitch darkness, teams of Navy divers, wearing Make-V deep-sea suits with thick brass helmets and canvas gear, move through flooded compartments. They cut away warped hatches, remove floating machinery, and search for bodies. The stench is overwhelming. Entire compartments are carpeted with oil-slicked sludge and decomposing remains. Even the most seasoned salvage men emerge gagging, their suits soaked in diesel, their boots filled with black water. Some divers report hearing strange noises deep within the hull, hissing, creaking, the occasional dull thunk. Superstitions run wild. Some claim the ship groans like it doesn't want to be disturbed. By Christmas Eve, 66 bodies have been recovered. Dozens more remain unreachable. But the clearance is working. Debris is being cataloged. Machinery is winched out by crane. Portholes are sealed with steel discs. Pumps begin sucking out the remaining water, and for the first time since December 7th, part of the West Virginia's main deck breaks the surface again. Sailors cheer. January 2nd, 1942. Dry dock preparations. The new year brings a new phase, preparing to refloat the West Virginia. Massive cofferdams are constructed along the port side, huge steel walls bolted over the torpedo holes. Inside, they're filled with concrete, then pressurized to stop water from rushing in. It's dirty, painstaking work. Every plate must be sealed, every bolt tightened by hand. Meanwhile, temporary watertight bulkheads are welded inside to isolate flooded compartments. Salvage crews work by headlamp, navigating hallways filled with twisted piping and mangled lockers. Above deck, temporary power lines are run from the dock to the ship. Lighting is restored to parts of the engine rooms. Air compressors begin venting the foul, stagnant gases trapped inside. On January 10th, pumps fire up. Slowly, the ship groans. Steel tightens. Water gurgles out through thick rubber hoses. West Virginia begins to rise. 1 inch at a time. January 14th, Machinery Room 3. Down below, in the third machinery space, Chief Machinist William Babcock enters what was once a humming engine room. Now, it's a mausoleum. Floodwaters had risen to the overhead. The huge steam turbines are coated in grime and rust. Everything is silent until his boots hit a bulkhead with a clunk. He kneels. A name is scratched into the metal in grease pencil. A final message from one of the entombed. There are no words. The team raises another 3 bodies that day. Every time the men haul one out, they salute. No one jokes, no one talks much. They just keep working. January 20th. Above deck. Welding sparks dance in the dusk as a new section of superstructure is craned into place. The battleship is beginning to resemble herself again, at least from the outside. Below, workers install temporary bilge keels and structural braces to strengthen the hull. West Virginia's keel has held remarkably well, but time is against them. The Pacific War is expanding daily. The Navy needs hulls, not rusting memorials. And still, there are complications. On January 24th, a bulkhead seal fails in the forward fire room. 2,000 gallons of brackish water pour back in. Work halts for 48 hours. Engineers scramble to reinforce pressure seams. Divers re-enter dangerous spaces. One man nearly drowns when his air hose snags on a girder. Commander Wallen orders a full inspection of all welds. No risks, no shortcuts. January 30th. The ghost deck. As part of final clearance, a special team is sent into what's now being called the ghost deck compartment, C301L. It was sealed after the attack, with reports of men trapped inside. They enter with caution. Inside, they find what was feared. 12 men, bodies arranged near the air vent as though they had waited, praying, knowing no one would reach them in time. A calendar is found, days scratched off by hand. The last mark is December 23rd. They had survived for 16 days. The team doesn't speak of it when they emerge, only that they carried each man out wrapped in the ship's own canvas. After that, every worker, even civilians, begin leaving notes, patches, or names scribbled on the walls. The ship is becoming sacred. Not just steel and bolts anymore. She's memory. She's witness. She's revenge in waiting. February 4th. Final pumps activated. After nearly 2 months of salvage, the West Virginia floats again fully, her waterline exposed, hull sealed. The last of the oil is siphoned out. Power is partially restored. She's towed slowly toward dry dock number 1. Crowds gather on the shoreline. Sailors in white uniforms line the dock. Some cheer, some salute, some just stare. A few remember the smoke, the screams, the fire. Now, she rises from it all. Bent, but not broken. The harbor that watched her die now watches her return. February 9th, 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, dry dock number 1. The sound is deafening, a thunder of chains, engines, and shouted orders echoing off concrete walls. Water drains away in torrents, rushing from beneath the battleship's hull. The USS West Virginia settles slowly, groaning under her own weight, until steel blocks catch her keel with a jarring clang. For the first time since December 7th, she stands again on dry ground. Hundreds of workers crowd the dock's edge. Helmets gleam in the sunlight. Welding sparks flash like lightning against the blackened armor. The sight is both brutal and beautiful. The skeletal shape of a once proud warship, battered, burnt, but alive. Commander Homer Wallen stands on a scaffolding platform, clipboard in hand, the scent of scorched oil thick around him. "Gentlemen," he says quietly to his team, "we're not raising a ship anymore. We're rebuilding a fighter." February 12th, hull inspection day. The engineers move methodically, crawling beneath the exposed belly of the West Virginia. Flashlights sweep across the steel, revealing the full extent of the destruction. 7 massive torpedo holes scar the port side, each one big enough to drive a truck through. Bomb damage pocks the upper deck. Armor plates are peeled like tin. Propeller shafts are bent, rudders warped. Lieutenant Commander Martin runs a gloved hand along one of the ruptures. "She shouldn't even be standing," he mutters. But she is. Naval architects from the Bureau of Ships arrive to document every wound. They sketch, measure, and calculate. Some recommend scrapping the vessel entirely. The steel's warped, the engines are shot, and the electrical systems are ruined. But Wallen shakes his head. If she floated once, she'll fight again. The inspection ends with a quiet resolution. The West Virginia will live. February 20th. Rebirth begins. The dry dock transforms into a battlefield of sparks and steel. Work continues 24 hours a day under floodlights that burn through the Hawaiian night. The clang of hammers and shriek of grinders replace the sound of gunfire. Civilians and sailors work side by side, 1,000 men by day, 700 by night. Teams install massive steel patches over the torpedo holes, each weighing several tons. Welders in leather aprons crawl over the hull like ants, fusing metal into new life. Inside the engine rooms, electricians begin stripping ruined wiring, laying miles of new copper cabling. Machinists repair turbines using salvaged parts from other ships, California, Nevada, Oklahoma. Every piece of spare steel in the Pacific seems to find its way here. The West Virginia becomes a Frankenstein's monster of naval engineering, part original, part reborn. On deck, gun mounts are unbolted and replaced. The burned-out anti-aircraft guns are removed entirely. New Bofors 40mm mounts are already being fabricated in California, waiting for the day she can bear arms again. Even her armor is redesigned. The U.S. Navy decides that when she sails again, she'll be stronger, thicker armor belts, reinforced bulkheads, and new watertight compartments designed to prevent the kind of catastrophic flooding that nearly destroyed her. The message is clear. America isn't just repairing what Japan broke. It's improving it. March 1st, 1942. The heart of the ship. Deep in the machinery spaces, Chief Machinist Babcock and his team lower a new main feed pump into position. The old one had seized in the attack, its pistons fused by salt and corrosion. It takes 12 men and 2 cranes to guide the new unit in. As they bolt it down, Babcock murmurs, "You'll beat again, old girl." By now, the crew have nicknamed the ship Wee V again, her old pre-war nickname, whispered half in affection, half in defiance. Letters start arriving from sailors who once served aboard her, many now scattered across the Pacific on other ships. Some include photographs, others just short notes. "Give her hell, boys. Let her roar for us." The workers pin them along the bulkheads of the wardroom. Every face, every line of handwriting becomes fuel. March 10th. A visit from the Admiral. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz himself walks the dock that morning. The men snap to attention, oil-stained and exhausted but proud. Nimitz stops beneath the ship's bow, cranes his neck upward, and lets out a low whistle. "She's one hell of a sight," he says quietly to Wallen. "Can you get her seaworthy?" Wallen nods. "Not just seaworthy, sir. Combat ready." Nimitz studies the wreckage, then smiles faintly. "That's what I like to hear. The Pacific's waiting." He leaves without ceremony, but word spreads fast. From that day on, morale skyrockets. The shipyard becomes a forge of patriotism. Every hammer strike seems to echo with Nimitz's promise. The Pacific's waiting. March 15th. The men who lived. Some of the original crew returned to see the Progress survivors of the attack, now reassigned elsewhere. Among them is Seaman First Class Claude Whitaker, who escaped the ship's burning deck by diving into oil-covered water on December 7th. He hasn't set foot near her since. Now, he stands by the dry dock rail, staring down at her skeleton. "I thought she'd be gone forever," he says softly. "Didn't think anything could come back from that." One of the welders overhears him and grins. "She ain't the only one." Whitaker laughs the first time in months. He stays that night, helping paint identification numbers on the forward bulkhead. For many, it becomes personal. Each bolt tightened, each plate riveted, feels like defiance, like striking back. March 21st. The West Virginia stands tall. By late March, the battleship looks whole again. Her hull is sealed, her keel line gleams under fresh paint. The dry dock floor is cleaned and swept. Massive cranes lift sections of her superstructure back into place. A test is conducted. Water is reintroduced slowly, flooding around the ship's base. She rises cleanly, no leaks, no groans, no shift in balance. The dock engineers exchange silent nods. Against all odds, the USS West Virginia once a sunken coffin, now floats again under her own strength. On shore, Commander Wallen removes his helmet, wipes sweat from his brow, and says to Martin, "She's earned her second life." Martin looks at the ship, black, scarred, magnificent. "Then let's make it count." That night, the shipyard is quiet, except for the soft lap of water and the hum of generators. Moonlight glints off her newly welded armor. Somewhere out at sea, American carriers are beginning to strike back. The Doolittle Raiders are training in secret, and plans for Midway are forming. But here in the Hawaiian night, an old warship breathes again. Soon, she will fight. April 1st, 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. The morning haze drifts low across the harbor, broken only by the black silhouette of the West Virginia. She towers once more battered, patched, but undeniably upright. Her hull is sealed, her decks reinforced, her wounds dressed in steel, but her journey is far from over. At 0745 hours, a courier from ComNavPac arrives with an envelope bearing the stamp. "Confidential eyes only." Inside is a single typed order from Admiral Nimitz's office. "Prepare USS West Virginia for tow to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Bremerton, Washington. Complete reconstruction to commence immediately." The message spreads quickly. The West Virginia's rebirth at Pearl is complete, but her resurrection into a modern fighting ship will happen thousands of miles away. Commander Homer Wallen, who has guided every torch and rivet since December, folds the paper silently. "She's ready," he says aloud, more to himself than anyone else. He knows what this means. What comes next is no salvage operation. It's transformation. April 5th, outfitting for the voyage. Over the next 10 days, the Weavy becomes a ship in transition. She can float, but she cannot yet fight or steam under her own power. Her engines remain gutted, her main armament silent. To prepare her for the long tow across the Pacific, shipyard workers swarm the decks to stabilize everything. Temporary navigational lights are installed. New rigging is bolted into place. Cranes remove the last of the unusable weaponry and twisted superstructure. 2 fleet tugs, USS Navajo and USS Seminole, are assigned for the tow. Their job, drag 32,000 tons of steel from Hawaii to Washington, through waters still patrolled by Japanese submarines. The voyage will take nearly 3 weeks. Lieutenant Commander Martin personally inspects the towing gear, running his hands along each cable. "If anything snaps in open sea," he mutters, "she'll drift like a tombstone." No one takes the risk lightly. April 15th, departure. Before dawn, sailors and workers gather on the pier for one final send-off. A military band plays a slow, solemn tune, not celebratory, but resolute. Dozens of men remove their caps. Some salute, some simply watch. The West Virginia is pulled from her moorings, inch by inch, by tugboats straining against the current. Her decks are stripped, her guns silent, but her flag flies high at the stern, stars and stripes catching the wind. No longer a wreck, not yet a warship. She is something in between, a ghost made of steel, being towed toward destiny. As the tugs turn her toward open sea, one yard worker scrawls a final message on the dock wall with a piece of chalk. "Bring hell with you when you come back, Weavy." April 22nd. Pacific transit. The voyage is slow, cautious, and tense. The West Virginia, with no engines, is utterly vulnerable. Escort destroyers patrol around her like wolves circling a wounded beast. Every sonar ping is a warning. Japanese submarines have been active around Hawaii and the West Coast. The USS Wasp had been sunk just 6 months earlier. No one underestimates the risk. To maintain her stability, tanks within the battleship are carefully flooded and drained. Engineers monitor her trim constantly. She pitches heavily in the open swells. Each time a storm hits, the tugs throttle down, fearing a line could snap. On the 8th night, the convoy receives a distress signal from a nearby merchant vessel. A torpedo has struck near Midway. The West Virginia's escorting destroyer peels off briefly to investigate. For 2 hours, the crippled battleship drifts alone, rocking in the waves, lights extinguished. Inside her hollow compartments, the wind moans like voices of the dead. April 29th, coastline in sight. At long last, land appears on the horizon, the gray cliffs of the Olympic Peninsula. Rain lashes the decks, and cold Pacific winds whip across the Sound. But no one complains. The convoy approaches Puget Sound Naval Shipyard under heavy cloud. A signal flare is fired from the lead tug. On the shore, Navy spotters and shipwrights line the dock, watching the ghost ship approach like something out of myth. Even after 4 months, word of her resurrection has reached the mainland. Newspapers have called it the comeback of the century. She slips into dry dock number 4 at Bremerton on May 1st, 1942. With chains groaning and engines reversing, the tugs bring her to a halt. A bell rings once from the pier. The sound echoes across the basin. The West Virginia is home. May 2nd. The assessment begins. Within hours, naval engineers descend on the ship with clipboards and chalk. Her decks are marked like blueprints. Every gun emplacement is mapped, every compartment measured for redesign. The decision is made. New 5-inch dual-purpose guns will replace the old open mounts. Advanced radar and fire control systems will be integrated. Her entire superstructure will be rebuilt in line with the South Dakota-class design. She will emerge not as the same ship, but as something far more lethal. Captain William R. Gunderson, assigned to oversee her full modernization, runs a hand along her conning tower and says to his officers, "Let's make her the last thing the Empire of Japan ever sees." In the shadow of the Olympic Mountains, hammers begin to ring once more. Sparks fly, blueprints unfurl, and beneath it all, the battered heart of a ship that should have died in the harbor now beats louder with every passing day. The Pacific still waits, and so does vengeance. May 5th, 1942. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Bremerton, Washington. Rain drums on the scaffolding like distant artillery. Under a canopy of canvas and steel, hundreds of shipfitters, machinists, welders, and pipefitters swarm over the skeletal body of the USS West Virginia. Her hull towers over the dock like a fallen giant in mid-transformation, armored yet vulnerable, silent but brimming with purpose. Captain William R. Gunderson, standing atop the foredeck catwalk, watches the cruise with a cigarette burning between 2 fingers. He's a quiet man, Navy to the core, and this ship, this wreck-turned resurrection, is now his command. "She died once," he mutters to his executive officer, Commander Robert K. Young. "She doesn't get to die again." The work orders are vast. The timeline? Ruthless. Washington wants her back in the Pacific within 2 years, not just repaired, but reimagined. The men below have no illusions. This isn't a restoration. It's a full-blown rebirth. May, June 1942, gutted to the bones. Day by day, the weavy is stripped bare. Every wire, every rusted pipe, every scorched bulkhead removed. The charred remnants of her once formidable superstructure are cut away with blowtorches, piece by piece. Even her bridge, where Captain Benyon bled out giving his final orders, is dismantled. But no one forgets. Before the cutting begins, shipyard workers quietly pause by the conning tower. A single metal plate, blackened and twisted, still bears a jagged shrapnel scar, the one that took Benyon's life. Instead of scrapping it, they bolt it onto the new bridge framework. A reminder, a monument. In the shipyard cafeteria, they start calling her the Phoenix. Below the waterline, her hull is re-reamed and reinforced. Crews weld new armor belts 14 inches thick in places along her flanks. She's widened slightly at the beam to improve underwater protection. Pump rooms are redesigned, compartments reconfigured. Her original power plant, 4 Parsons steam turbines, is removed entirely. New boilers are fabricated and shipped from Philadelphia. The shipyard becomes a hive of logistical choreography. Cranes swing night and day. Barges ferry in equipment. Some components are built in Michigan and rail shipped cross-country under armed guard. When her main propulsion shafts are craned into place in mid-June, the dock workers erupt into cheers. She's no longer just a hulk. She's becoming a battleship again. July 1942. Reinventing firepower. The West Virginia was born in the 1920 seconds, and much of her original armament reflected that era low-angle 5-inch guns and exposed casemates, vulnerable to air attack. That will not do anymore. Not after Pearl Harbor. Not in this new kind of war. Captain Gunderson meets with ordnance specialists in a drafty meeting room inside the shipyard headquarters. On the table is a revised armament layout. 8x5, over 38 caliber dual-purpose guns in enclosed twin turrets. 40mm Bofors in quad and twin mounts. 20mm Oerlikon cannons along her superstructure. Every gun will be radar-directed. Every angle of approach from sea to sky will be covered in steel. The shift is dramatic. She's not just being armed for ship-to-ship slugfests anymore. She's being prepared for massed aerial attacks, for kamikazes, for the kind of multi-axis assaults that have become common in the Solomons and Coral Sea. One yard supervisor mutters, "She's going to look like a porcupine with a bad attitude." Exactly the point. August 1942. Skeleton and spirit. By late summer, the new superstructure begins to rise. Where once stood a pre-war bridge tower, now a sleek, angular design emerges based on lessons learned from the South Dakota class. Lower profile, narrower silhouette, better protected. Steel plates are riveted into place, with a chorus of pneumatic hammers. Ladders clang. Men shout down measurements. The tempo never slows. In the machine shops, workers etch initials or ship names onto freshly fabricated components. Lexington, Hornet, Arizona. Tiny tributes in hidden corners. The dead, quite literally, becoming part of the living ship. During one shift change, a welder named Thomas Leahy leaves a note wedged into the bulkhead behind gun mount 2. "For my brother Jimmy. Pearl Harbor, 12/7. I'll bring you home." The workers never ask for recognition. They don't wear uniforms, but their sweat stains the decks all the same. Many have lost family in the war. Some lost brothers on West Virginia herself. Rebuilding her isn't just a job, it's a reckoning. September 1942. Systems come alive. Piping begins to snake through the ship like veins. New electrical conduits are run through every level. The ventilation system, once clogged with smoke and death, is replaced with modern fans and filters. Engineers install state-of-the-art radar. Mark 8 fire control radar for the main battery. Mark 9 target designation radar. SG surface search radar mounted above the bridge. With each new system installed, the WV inches closer to a new identity, one that her original builders in the 1920 seconds could never have imagined. When her engines are finally lowered into place in early October, her displacement crosses 33,000 tons. She is no longer a product of the interwar fleet. She is, at last, a modern warship. The name West Virginia is repainted on her stern in sharp white lettering. She no longer carries the scars of Pearl Harbor, at least not visibly. But those who built her haven't forgotten. And soon, neither will the enemy. October 15th, 1942. 1 year out. Standing on the newly completed bridge, Captain Gunderson stares across Puget Sound. 1 year, he says quietly. Almost to the day since they tried to kill her. Commander Young, beside him, nods. They should have tried harder. Below them, the ship shudders slightly as auxiliary power tests come online. Lights flicker on across the decks. For the first time in over 300 days, the West Virginia glows. November 2nd, 1942. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. Steam hisses from a vent amidships. Rain slides down freshly painted bulkheads. A mechanic wipes his hands on a rag as he watches the West Virginia's boiler systems roar to life for the first time since her rebirth began. Inside the engine room, the ship hums not with noise, but with potential. Turbines spin under controlled power. Gauges twitch. Pipes shudder with pressure. Chief Engineer Lieutenant Commander Richard M. Green runs his hand along the hot casing of the No. 2 boiler. "She's breathing again," he says, voice low, reverent. 1 year ago, this ship was a grave. Now, she's a weapon. And the war she's returning to is very different from the one she left behind. Mid-November 1000. 942. War without end. Across the Pacific, American forces are locked in the mud and jungles of Guadalcanal. Every week brings another dispatch of fierce naval engagements, carrier duels, and bloody infantry battles. The Japanese Imperial Navy has proven itself a brutal night-fighting force, hammering the U.S. fleet with torpedoes and fanatical resolve. The era of the decisive battleship line of Jutland-style duels is fading. Now, war is multidimensional. Carrier strikes over hundreds of miles. Submarines lurking in every sea lane. Kamikaze tactics on the horizon. And yet, even in this new age, the big guns still have a role. Naval gunfire support is essential for landings. Heavy armor can still turn the tide in a surface engagement. And the psychological weight of a battleship cannot be underestimated. The West Virginia, now outfitted with advanced radar, dual-purpose guns, and state-of-the-art fire control systems, is being reborn into this reality. She is no longer just a battleship. She is an answer. December 1942. Sea trials approaching. Preparations begin for sea trials, the crucible that will prove whether the WV is seaworthy again. Final systems tests are conducted. Steering gears checked and double-checked. Electrical systems energized and run under full load. Watertight integrity confirmed with dye tests and pressure seals. Technicians crawl through every access point, every shaft tunnel, every fire control circuit. The engine room is a maze of copper, steel, and sweat. In the plotting room, fire control specialists test radar lock-on with dummy targets set up in the sound. The Mark 8 radar pings, calculates, tracks. Target bearing 212, range 17,000 yards, says one fire controlman. Lock acquired, ready to fire. No shells will be fired today, but soon, very soon, her 16-inch guns will roar again. January 2nd, 1943. The crew returns. The first of her new crew arrives by train and bus. Many are fresh recruits. Others are veterans rotated off other ships. Some served on her before the attack and requested to come back. They gather on the pier, sea bags in hand, eyes wide as they take in the sight. She looks mean, one sailor mutters. Another, older, nods. She always did. Captain Gunderson meets them personally. He doesn't deliver a grand speech, just a line that circulates for weeks afterward. This ship was sunk by the enemy. If she ever goes down again, it won't be without a fight. Below decks, sailors are assigned to new berthing compartments. The air still smells of steel and primer, but the mess halls gleam. The machine shops shine. Compartments once flooded and filled with death, now buzz with drills and laughter. One of the sailors, Seaman First Class Miguel Ramos, walks past a bulkhead and sees the names scratched into it. Jimmy, Pearl Harbor, 12/7. He pauses, traces the letters with a finger, then keeps walking. January 20th, 1943. First sea trial. The sun breaks through low clouds as the USS West Virginia slips out of dry dock under her own power. Her new turbines turn slow, steady revolutions. Tugboats escort her gently through the channel, but only as a formality. For the first time in over a year, she answers her own helm. The trial is short, just 2 hours around the protected waters of Puget Sound, but it's enough to test basic propulsion, steering, and rudder response. Down in the engine room, the crew listens to every groan of metal and hiss of pressure. "She's holding," reports Green. "Pressure within limits. Temp steady." Bridge to engine room. Increased to 2/3. The ship accelerates. No rattles. No strange vibrations. On the bridge, Gunderson says nothing. Just watches the coastline recede and feels the tremor beneath his boots. The dead ship lives. February 14th, 1943. Full power run. The second sea trial is the real test, 72 hours at sea. Full speed turns, combat systems online, live radar tracking and coordination with support vessels. Out in the open Pacific, the West Virginia finally shows her teeth. She hits 21 knots on her final power run. The hull holds. Engines scream. Not a rivet loosens. Fire control exercises simulate a surface engagement. Radar locks are near instant. Mock gunnery is clocked at under 60 seconds from detection to firing solution. She's better than she was in 41, remarks Lieutenant Green. Hell, better than she ever was. The final report from the trial board is simple. Recommended for full operational status. Battle ready. March 1st, 1943. Orders to join the fleet. The signal comes in over encrypted channel. USS West Virginia to report to Pearl Harbor for final shakedown. Then to be assigned to Pacific Fleet for combat duty. Captain Gunderson gathers the crew in the mess decks. Some lean on railings, others sit cross-legged with coffee in hand. The room falls silent. We leave in 72 hours, he tells them. We're going home, and then we're going back to war. A cheer rises, not loud, not wild, but certain. Outside, snow has dusted the peaks around Puget Sound. The ship's new paint glints in the winter Sunday. Her flag flaps sharp against the wind. She is not what she was. She is something more, forged in fire, rebuilt in silence. And now she sails. March 4th, 1943, Bremerton, Washington. 0500 hours. The sky is still dark as deckhands cast off the final mooring lines. A horn bellows across Puget Sound, long and low. The USS West Virginia slides away from the dock, her engines humming, stern flag illuminated by the shipyard's overhead lights. A small crowd watches from the pier workers, family members, civilians who spent over a year willing her back to life. No band plays. No speeches are given. Just the sound of her hull cutting through the water and the echo of chains rattling as anchors are stowed. Below deck, sailors man stations with crisp efficiency. Engine room teams check turbine pressure, shaft rotations, auxiliary generators. On the bridge, Captain William R. Gunderson stands beside the helmsman, eyes fixed forward, hands behind his back. She's on her own now, he murmurs. Let's take her home. March 12th, 1943. Pacific Transit westbound. The Weavy cuts through calm seas at a steady 15 knots. Her wake stretches behind her like a white scar on the ocean's face. Every system is tested again under operational strain. Radar sweeps in rotating arcs. Fire control teams practice target acquisition, and engine rooms maintain constant telemetry logging. Morale is high. There's pride in every movement, pride in the ship, in the crew, and in the comeback no one thought possible. Many of the crew are young, barely old enough to remember December 7th. Others had been aboard when she sank. Below the main deck, Seaman First Class Claude Whitaker returns to his old compartment. The space is rebuilt, unrecognizable, clean, modern, dry. But he runs his fingers along the bulkhead anyway, remembering the smoke, the noise, the men who didn't make it out. He doesn't say anything to the others, just sits on the lower rack and listens to the hum of the engines. Outside, the Pacific rolls on endlessly, but each wave brings them closer. March 15th, 1943. Oahu in sight. On the horizon, green peaks rise from a hazy band of sea mist. The volcanic ridges of Oahu jagged, sharp, familiar. As the West Virginia rounds toward the harbor, men line the rails in dress whites, binoculars trained on the coastline. Pearl Harbor. It's been 15 months since she last saw these waters. Since the smoke of burning ships painted the sky and the dead floated oil slicked in the shallows. Now, the harbor is calm. The base rebuilt. The scars still visible, but healed over with purpose. Approaching channel entrance, the helmsman reports. Captain Gunderson grips the brass rail of the bridge. All ahead slow. Steady as she goes. The Weavy glides into the harbor. Sailors aboard the USS Arizona Memorial, under construction nearby, pause their work and remove their caps as she passes. A destroyer, USS Fletcher, sounds its whistle in salute. The West Virginia replies with one long, echoing blast, deep and defiant. On the shore, those who remember that December morning watch in silence as the ship that died here returns. March 16th, April 5th. Final shakedown and refitting. Pearl Harbor. Moored once again at Ford Island, West Virginia undergoes her final Pacific shakedown. Engineers verify radar synchronization with fleet protocols. Ammunition stores are loaded shells stacked with reverence in spotless magazines. Her 16-inch guns are re-inspected, oiled, and tested in dry fire drills. Fire control teams run exercises day and night. Spotters simulate enemy sightings. Plotters track fictional squadrons. Radar operators test signal discrimination against friendly aircraft. Air lookouts train with the new Mach 51 directors, sinking the 40mm Bofors batteries for maximum anti-aircraft coverage. The sound of drills echoes across the water. Practice alarms ring out like thunderclaps. Her transformation is complete, not just in steel, but in doctrine. She is no longer built to slug it out in battle lines. She is built for a new kind of war, and she's ready for it. April 6th, 1943. Orders received. A decoded transmission arrives in the radio room. Commander Robert K. Young reads it aloud on the bridge. USS West Virginia is hereby assigned to Task Force 34, Pacific Fleet. Prepare for forward deployment. Combat operations pending. The moment hits hard. After everything, the flames, the entombment, the silence of dry dock, she is returning to the fight. In the wardroom, Captain Gunderson addresses the senior staff. There's no pomp, just resolve. We didn't come this far to sit in harbor, he says. We sail as a new ship, but we remember how we got here. Make no mistake, when the enemy sees that battle flag flying, they'll know Pearl Harbor didn't break us. It forged us. Silence follows. Then quiet nods. April 10th, 1943. Departure. As the sun rises, West Virginia departs Pearl Harbor, her decks bristling with armament, her hull gleaming in fresh paint. She leads a small escort group eastward, bound for combat readiness training and eventual action in the Central Pacific. The ship's bell rings out as she clears the harbor mouth 4 peals, then silence. Sailors gather aft, watching the receding island. Among them, a boatswain's mate recites the phrase that's been whispered on the ship since Bremerton. They tried to kill her. They only made her stronger. The engines rumble deep below, the wake fans wide behind her. The guns are clean, the radars sweep. And somewhere out there, Saipan, Leyte, Iwo Jima battles await. But now, the West Virginia is ready. She is not the ship that burned. She is the ship that came back. October 18th, 1944, off the coast of Leyte, Philippines. The sea is calm, but the air vibrates with tension. On the horizon, dark silhouettes of American warships stretch like a steel wall across the Gulf carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and 7 battleships, among them USS West Virginia. She rides at anchor under a sky thick with storm clouds, her crew on edge. This is what they've waited for. Below deck, boilers hiss and turbines hum in readiness. On the bridge, Captain Andrew G. Kirk, who had relieved Gunderson for active fleet command, studies his orders. The invasion of the Philippines has begun. West Virginia is to provide pre-landing bombardment, fire support, and naval gunfire coordination for the largest amphibious assault since Normandy. But what no one knows yet, not the admirals, not the Marines, not even MacArthur, is that in 4 days the Japanese fleet will come, and the WV will face the battle she was rebuilt for. October 19th, 20th. Fire support and fury. The West Virginia moves closer to shore, flanked by her sisters Tennessee, California, Maryland. Each of them had burned at Pearl Harbor. Each had come back. Together, they begin the bombardment of Leyte. At 0630, the first salvo is ordered. The WV's number 2 turret shutters. A flash, a shockwave, a thunderclap like the sky cracking open. A 1,500-pound shell arcs toward the jungle inland, targeting entrenched Japanese positions near Dulag. Within minutes, entire sections of beach defenses erupt in flames and debris. Civilians watch from hidden hills as American battleships tear apart fortifications that took months to build in hours. From the Fire Direction Center, Lieutenant Raymond, Red Hughes, adjusts for the next volley. Shift fire, range, 3,200 yards. He airburst. The roar of her guns continues for 2 days. Her radar-guided precision nearly impossible in 1941 now lets her strike targets obscured by jungle and mist. Troop movements, artillery nests, and pillboxes vanish under high explosive. The Marines call it the thunder of resurrection. October 23rd. The Japanese fleet moves. American signals, intelligence, intercepts, reports. The Japanese have launched a massive naval operation to destroy the invasion fleet at Leyte. They're coming in 3 separate forces from different directions. A final, desperate gamble. One of those forces, the most powerful, is Center Force, under Admiral Takeo Kurita, including the Yamato, Musashi, and a host of heavy cruisers and destroyers. Admiral William F. Halsey takes his carriers north, chasing what he believes is the main enemy force. That night, the Southern Force battleships Yamashiro, Fuso, and cruisers slips through the Sulu Sea and heads straight for the narrow waters of Surigao Strait. And standing in their path is USS West Virginia. October 24th, night before the storm. As night falls, West Virginia is battle-ready. Ammunition lockers are stocked, every gun is loaded, fire control radar is tracking. Men eat silently in the mess hall, fully geared. Officers walk the decks with flashlights off. In the CIC, the Combat Information Center radar operators monitor every contact, every bearing. The strait is narrow. There's only one way through. Down below, in the powder magazines, Gunner's Mate Second Class Willie Sanders double-checks the hydraulic hoist lines. "We only get one shot at this," he tells his loader. "Let's make it count." Above, in the plotting room, Lieutenant Hughes reviews firing solutions. The math is exact, but the moment feels ancient. 2 fleets of battleships about to clash head-to-head at close range. It's the last of its kind. The last battleship-on-battleship engagement in history. And West Virginia will fire the first shot. October 25, 1944. 03:30 hours. Surigao Strait. Rain falls in sheets. The darkness is total. But West Virginia's radar paints the enemy in real time, blips moving steadily into range. Japanese ships, unaware they're sailing into a kill zone. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf has laid a trap. Destroyers and PT boats up front, cruisers behind, and 6 U.S. battleships positioned at a perpendicular angle across the strait, a perfect T. It is textbook naval warfare. At 0349, radar rangefinders confirm. Japanese battleship Yamashiro is 22,800 yards out and closing. Captain Kirk orders, "Commence fire." A moment later, the WV's forward turret erupts. 6 16-inch guns bark into the night. Seconds later, the sky lights up as a dozen other American ships join in. West Virginia fires again, then again. Her radar locks are so precise that every salvo walks in on target like a drumbeat. Fire control teams track corrections automatically. No flares, no guesswork. Just steel, smoke, and silence between detonations. Japanese return fire is scattered, ineffective. They can't see. They're shooting blind. The Yamashiro takes multiple hits from West Virginia, Tennessee, California. Shells tear through her bridge and main battery. At 0412, Yamashiro capsizes and sinks. Fuso, struck earlier by torpedoes, explodes in 2. By 0430, the battle is over. West Virginia, once thought lost, has led the final line of battle engagement in naval history and emerged unscathed. Dawn. The sea is quiet now. Smoke hangs low over the water. Burning oil trails drift toward the horizon. Survivors cling to wreckage. The sun rises over Surigao Strait, and the WV's deck crews stand in stunned silence. Some cheer, others weep. Most just watch the burning silhouettes of what's left of the Japanese fleet. In the logbook, the fire control officer writes, "Opened fire at 0349, seized at 0411, expended 93 rounds of 16-inch, confirmed radar contact hits." And beneath it, a single line, "West Virginia's vengeance is complete." But her war is not over. There are more islands to take, more blood to spill, and still more to prove. Because surviving is not enough. Now she will finish what was started. November 1944, Leyte Gulf, Philippines. Black smoke from the burning wreckage of Yamashiro still lingers on the horizon as USS West Virginia turns southeast, pulling away from the shattered battlefield of Surigao Strait. Her decks are scorched with powder residue, her barrels hot to the touch. But the ship is unharmed, untouched, a miracle in the age of steel and shells. Below decks, the gun crews clean the breaches in silence. No one jokes, no one cheers. They've just witnessed something ancient and final, the last great duel of battleships. And West Virginia, raised from the dead, fired the first shot. But celebration would be premature. In the skies above the Philippines, a new enemy is waiting, and it doesn't care how thick your armor is. November Japanese strategy shifts. Intercepted signals and prisoner interrogations reveal a terrifying shift in Japanese naval doctrine. The Imperial Navy is now encouraging Tokotai special attack units, the kamikaze. Desperate to stem the American advance across the Philippines, the Japanese have turned to suicide pilots, young men trained not to return. Their aircraft are crude, stripped-down Zeros and Betty bombers loaded with explosives, fuel, and grim determination. And now they're heading for the invasion fleet. Admiral Sprague, commanding the 7th Fleet Support Force, issues the alert. All ships increase AA readiness. Radar watches 24 hours. Kamikaze threat confirmed. On West Virginia, gunnery drills double. The quad 40mm Bofors guns are cleaned, oiled, and rehearsed daily. Lookouts are ordered to rotate every 45 minutes to keep eyes fresh. The ship's radar, one of the most advanced in the fleet, becomes her most vital weapon. Because for all her armor, all her guns, there's no predicting a man who intends to die. November 13th. First contact. Late afternoon, cloudless sky. Visibility is excellent. Lookouts spot a speck at 10,000 feet, moving erratically. Aircraft inbound, bearing 022, high speed, low altitude. Within seconds, the CIC confirms. Single zero, diving fast. No response to Hale's classic kamikaze signature. The ship goes to general quarters. Klaxons wail. Gun crews sprint to stations. The deck reverberates as the 5-inch dual-purpose guns elevate and fire. A column of black smoke erupts in front of the diving aircraft, a near miss. Then the 40mm Bofors open up a storm of tracers and deafening thunder. The Zero breaks apart in midair, torn by flak and shells. Burning fragments scatter into the sea, trailing fuel like a comet. Cheering erupts on the starboard gun deck, but it dies quickly, because there's another blip on radar, and another, and another. That was just the first wave. November 14th, 20th. Kamikaze season. For the next week, the skies over Leyte are filled with screaming engines, black smoke, and tracer fire. Kamikazes descend like wasps, fast, erratic, suicidal. USS West Virginia shoots down 5 in 3 days. Her radar locks them before they're visible. Her guns track them with mechanical precision. But other ships aren't as lucky. On November 16th, USS Street Low, a small escort carrier, is hit by a kamikaze and explodes, taking 143 men with her. On November 19th, USS Colorado, another Pearl Harbor survivor, takes a near miss. Her superstructure is torn open. Every man aboard Weavy knows it's only a matter of time. The crew sleeps in flak vests. Damage control parties sleep beside hoses and axes. Topside AA gunners keep ammo belts draped over their shoulders like bandoliers. The war has changed again. No longer fighting other ships. Now, they're fighting ghosts with wings. December 3rd. The near miss. A low-flying A6M0 breaks through a gap in radar coverage just before dusk. It streaks in from port, almost sea-skimming. The AA crews are late to spot it. The gun captain of Mount 2 Seaman First Class Joseph Mallory opens fire with the 20mm Oerlikons, tracers arcing across the sky. Too late, the Zero climbs, banks hard, and plunges toward the main deck. Impact seems certain until a burst from the number 4 Bofors mount clips its wing at the last second. The plane shears off midair, slamming into the sea just 50 feet off the bow. The concussion rattles every man on deck. Later, as they hose the debris off the deck, Mallory lights a cigarette with shaking hands. "I saw his eyes," he says. He was smiling. December 8th. A change of mission. With Leyte secured and kamikaze attacks slowing, West Virginia receives new orders. She will support the next major amphibious landing, Luzon. Her crew, hardened now, moves with practiced precision. The ship has proven she can survive the old war, and now she has survived the new. The men begin painting a tally on the side of the forward AA mount. 7 planes downed. A small gesture. But it means something. She isn't just a battleship. She's an ark of survival. A monument in motion. December 24th. Christmas Eve at sea. In the mess hall, the cooks serve hot turkey and reconstituted cranberry sauce. Someone strings a few lights around the hatch near the radio room. A phonograph plays White Christmas, skipping every few minutes. Captain Kirk stands before the crew and raises a tin cup. "I don't have a speech," he says. "Just this. You brought her back, and she brought us through. Merry Christmas, and God help the next poor bastard who gets in our way." Laughter, cheers, and then silence. Outside, the sea is calm. Below decks, 16-inch shells sit quietly in their racks. Above, the moonlight glints off gun barrels that have fired in rage and in defense. And somewhere, far off in the Pacific night, the next battle waits. But this time, the West Virginia is already there. April 1st, 1945, off the coast of Okinawa, Ryukyu Islands. The horizon burns with fire. Okinawa, the last stepping stone to Japan, is under siege. From 16 miles offshore, USS West Virginia watches the sky pulse with the flash of naval bombardment. Her 16-inch guns are loaded, coordinates verified. Marines ashore are calling for fire support. Target grid Lima 255, Japanese pillbox. Danger close, the radio man relays. Captain Andrew Kirk nods once. Commence fire. A second later, West Virginia's forward turret erupts the deep, percussive roar shaking the sea itself. Shells scream overhead and land inland with a shockwave felt even aboard the ship. Smoke, dirt, flame. Below decks, sailors brace as the recoil thunders through the hull. No one flinches. They've done this 100 times now. But this isn't just another island. This is the doorstep of the enemy. April 2nd, 7th. Hell in the Pacific. Okinawa becomes a war without rules. The Japanese defenders have turned the island into a fortress. Cave systems, suicide boats, hidden artillery, and above them all the kamikaze. Wave after wave descend upon the American fleet. On April 6th, the first Kikusue floating chrysanthemum suicide wave strikes. Over 300 planes come screaming in. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, all targeted. At 1,800 hours, USS West Virginia's radar picks up a fast-moving contact at low altitude. AD-3. A Val dive bomber barrels toward her amidships. All 6 Bofors mounts open fire. Tracers streak like lightning. The air is shredded with flak. The Val bursts into flames and spirals into the sea 200 yards off her starboard bow. Cheers erupt. But they're short-lived. Another contact, a Zero this time, comes in low. Hidden by the setting Sunday, it nearly reaches her aft before being shot down by USS Laffey off her beam. That night, the WV records 3 confirmed kills. No hits taken. But all around her the fleet burns. The destroyer USS Bush takes a kamikaze and sinks. USS Hancock loses dozens of men. Even the new battleship Missouri is hit. Okinawa is not a battle. It is attrition made manifest. April 13th. The enemy fires back. While kamikazes rule the skies, Japanese shore batteries still hold the high ground. On this day, they fire blind volley after volley toward the fleet. At 1,437, West Virginia's hull shudders, a near miss from a coastal artillery shell. The water geysers over the main deck. No penetration, no casualties. Captain Kirk doesn't flinch. Return fire. Battery 3, suppress that ridge. A minute later, 16-inch shells tear through the hills north of Naha. Spotters report the ridge vanishing under fire. On board. Crewmen nod without speaking. This is what the West Virginia was built for. To strike back. To erase. May 11, 1945. Okinawa holds. A month into the campaign, the Americans hold most of the western beaches. Japanese resistance stiffens inland, but the fleet's grip remains unshaken. West Virginia has fired over 300 rounds of 16-inch and more than 1,500 5-inch shells. The men are exhausted. Sleep comes in shifts. The roar of AA fire is constant. Smoke clings to everything: hair, clothes, even the walls below deck. But WV holds fast. She has taken no serious damage. Not a single kamikaze has breached her defenses. Her radar-guided guns, her resurrection miracle, have become her shield. One night, Seaman First Class Ramos scribbles on a bulkhead with chalk, "Pearl Harbor you missed. June 4th, 1945. Final barrage." At dawn, West Virginia unleashes her last major bombardment of the war. Inland Japanese bunkers near Shuri Line are marked by Marine forward observers. "Final firing mission," says Lieutenant Hughes from the plotting room. "Target confirmed." Gun crews load the final shells with care. Men who survived the sinking, who welded her back together, who watched her come alive again now, they chamber one last shot. The guns fire. The earth shakes. Smoke boils skyward. When it clears, the ridge is gone. The forward observer's voice crackles through the comms. "Target neutralized." "Thank you, WV." No reply is needed. August 15th, 1945. War ends. News crackles over the ship's PA. Emperor Hirohito has accepted Allied surrender terms. Hostilities ceased as of 2,400 hours. Cheers erupt across the deck. Some men cry. Others fall silent, staring at the sea. Captain Kirk calls an all-hands meeting on the main deck. "From the hell of Pearl Harbor to the fires of Okinawa, you brought her back. You made her whole. And you helped end this war. There are no words strong enough for what you've done. But I can give you one thing. We're going home." That night, the West Virginia powers down her main battery. Her deck lights glow soft. The Pacific is quiet. For the first time in years, there is no target. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay. The USS Missouri hosts the official surrender ceremony. Just a few hundred yards away, USS West Virginia drops anchor, one of only 6 ships present that had also been at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. She watches the ceremony from the water, from ghost to witness. Her flag flies at full mast. The Pearl Harbor ensign, the same one salvaged from her burning bridge, is raised again, not as a relic, but as a symbol. The circle had closed. The ship that sank in silence now floats in triumph. Epilogue. Steel and story. In the years that follow, West Virginia is decommissioned. Her guns fall silent. Her decks grow still. But her story never fades. In museums, in naval textbooks, in whispered stories between sailors, she becomes a legend. Not because she sank, but because she came back. Because no matter how deep she fell, how much fire she endured, she never stopped rising. Steel doesn't forget, and neither does history.